Before you step into this story, remember this: Georgia soil never forgets. Not the bodies buried in silence, not the screams swallowed by the trees, and not the monster that fed on all of it in 1910. If you're watching this right now, hit that subscribe button, because once you hear what happened in Whisper Creek, you're not going to sleep tonight. Because in 1910, the people thought the killings were done by a man. They were wrong. It wasn't a man. It was the land and the thing living inside it calling back every sin Georgia tried to hide. And tonight, we're opening the ground. The year was 1910, and the heat in southern Georgia sat thick enough to taste. It clung to the back of the throat like damp cotton, heavy and sour with the scent of soil that had been turned too many times by hands that never did it willingly. In the town of Ashford Hollow, the earth was red-rich, clay-packed, and always seeming just a little too wet, even in droughts. People like to say it was the river that made it that way, but those who had lived there long enough knew better. The land remembered what had been buried in it, and it held on to things. Some said the land whispered at night. Others swore it moaned. But most people didn't say anything at all, not out loud. Ashford Hollow was the kind of place where silence was learned the same way as walking, step by step, lesson by lesson, until quiet became muscle memory. Elias Harper, 26 years old and tired in ways a man that young shouldn't be, had spent his life trying not to listen to the things this land said. A sharecropper since he was old enough to push a plow. He'd learned early that listening too closely to the wrong things, especially things the world said weren't really there, could get a black man killed in Georgia. But on the morning his life truly split in half, the land didn't whisper. It screamed. And he heard it. It started like any other morning. Elias rose before sunrise, tightening the laces on his worn leather boots and stepping outside into air that already felt warmer than it should have been. The rows of cotton stretched out behind the small shack he lived in with his younger sister Naomi and their uncle Thomas, a quiet man whose back had never healed right after a chain gang sentence 12 years back. The fields were endless white tufts glowing faint in the pre-dawn. The sight was beautiful from a distance. Up close, it was only work, back-breaking work that stole years off a person's body and gave nothing back. Elias had learned long ago. Cotton was only beautiful to those who never had to pick it. Eli, Naomi called softly from the doorway. You ain't eaten. I will later, he said without turning. Tell Uncle Thomas I'm startin' early. Mr. Halvers says he wants the west rows cleared before Saturday. Naomi stepped outside, arms crossed against the morning breeze. She was only 19, but she carried herself like someone who had lived life twice already. You work yourself more than the land does, pays the debt faster. She stared at him, the same way their mother used to when she saw a storm in him he refused to name. You dream again? He hesitated. No, but he had, worse than usual. Dreams of roots, thick and black, wrapping around his wrists. Dreams of breathing earth. Dreams of a woman's voice, humming a song he never learned but somehow knew. You ain't a good liar, Naomi muttered. I ain't trying to be a good one, Elias replied, and forced a smile. I'm trying to get to work. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but she stopped. A wind passed, then short but strange. It chilled the back of Elias's neck even though the air was warm, and he turned slightly to look at the tree line bordering the property. Tall pines, Spanish moss, and something else. A shadow, no shape, no details, just a dense wrongness moved between the trunks. Naomi followed his gaze. You see that? No, Elias said too quickly. Ain't nothin'. But she shivered, and he knew she'd seen something too. By noon, the sun was a white-hot coin pressed directly against the world's forehead, and Elias was sweating through his shirt as he pushed the plow through the rows. His horse, Dusty, snorted and kicked at flies lazily. Everything was still. Until it wasn't. The earth trembled. Not violently, not enough to be a quake, but enough to make Dusty jerk and huff in alarm. Elias tightened his grip. Easy, boy! The ground settled, Dusty calmed, and Elias told himself it was nothing. But then he saw it a patch of soil ahead of him, darker than the rest, wet-looking, as though rain had fallen in a perfect circle no larger than 3 feet wide. But it hadn't rained in a week. Curious but cautious, Elias approached the circle and crouched down, running his fingers through the soil. Warm, too warm, like someone had buried coals just beneath the surface. Then, a whisper, soft, thin, feminine, right behind his ear. "Please." Elias shot to his feet, heart thundering. He spun around. Nothing. Just rows and rows of cotton swaying gently. No wind, no person, no voice, Dusty whined sharply. And then the ground beneath the dark circle bubbled as though something underneath was pushing upward. Elias took a step back. Then another. The soil bulged, cracked, split. A hand erupted from the earth, thin, skeletal, blackened with rot fingers stretching upward, desperately, before collapsing into a heap of dust and bone. Elias staggered back with a strangled curse. He waited. Nothing else surfaced, but the soil remained warm, and he could still feel the echo of the whisper in his ear. "Please." He ran home. He didn't mean to. Grown men didn't run from dirt, but he didn't stop until he reached the small shack and burst through the door, startling Naomi, who was stripping peas at the table. "Eli? Lord, what? Where's Uncle?" "In his room." "Why?" Elias didn't wait. Thomas Harper sat on the edge of his bed, tying his bootlaces with slow, methodical movements. His back was bent, shoulders rounded, hair streaked white prematurely. But his eyes, those eyes, were sharp. "Uncle," Elias breathed, "something's wrong with the fields." Thomas didn't look up. "Something's always wrong with them fields." "No, this is different." That made the old man pause. Elias told him what he saw: the hot soil, the bubbling earth, the hand, the voice. Thomas's fingers tightened around his bootlace until his knuckles whitened. Slowly he stood, bones cracking like dry twigs. "Where?" West rose. Thomas exhaled shakily. "I was hoping it'd skipped us." "What skipped us?" Thomas walked past him into the main room. Naomi rose, worry etched on her face. "Uncle?" she asked. Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the old carved cane leaning by the door. Elias had always thought it was just a cane, ugly, old, notched with strange little lines and shapes Thomas never explained. Now he gripped it like a weapon. He turned to Elias. "Boy, listen to me, and listen close. What you saw ain't new. That's the land speaking. And when it speaks like that, somebody's suffering." "Suffering? Under the ground?" Thomas's jaw clenched. "You think every soul laid in Georgia soil got laid down peaceful?" The room went silent. Naomi swallowed. "Uncle, what you sayin'?" Thomas looked from one to the other. "I'm sayin' this land got memories, and memories don't die easy. Not when they ain't settled, not when they was buried wrong, not when they was killed wrong." Elias's skin crawled. "You think I saw a ghost?" Thomas shook his head. "No, boy, not a ghost." He tapped the cane against the floor. "You saw a haint, and haints don't show themselves unless something real bad is stirrin'." That night, Elias couldn't sleep. Not because of the heat, not because of the insects singing in the piney woods, because of the whisper, "Please." It kept replaying in his mind, the way a wound repeats pain with every heartbeat. He stepped outside for air. The moon was low, half covered by clouds, swaddling the world in pale gloom. The fields stretched out like a ghostly sea. Then movement. At the far end of the cotton rows, a shape, female, thin, barefoot, wearing what looked like a torn white shift. Her hair was long, knotted, drifting around her as though underwater. She stood perfectly still, facing him. Elias's breath stopped in his throat. "Ma'am?" he whispered. No answer. He stepped toward her. One step, another. The distance between them didn't change. It was as though the field itself was stretching. "Ma'am?" He tried again. "You hurt? You need?" The woman raised her arm, pointed at the ground. Elias followed the direction of her finger and saw names, dozens of them, burned into the soil in long, shallow scars. Names he didn't recognize. Names of men, women, children, some carved deep, some faint, some overlapping each other as though written in desperation. He knelt, traced a fingertip along one of the names, Marjorie T. The soil beneath his finger trembled faintly. He looked back up. The woman was closer now. Too close. Her face was gaunt, sunken cheeks, hollow eyes lit with a pale blue glow, her skin cracked like dry clay. But her expression wasn't angry. It was sorrowful. She mouthed a word. Elias strained to see. Then he realized, not a word, a name, Marjorie. A cold burst of understanding shot through him. You're her. The woman nodded once, slow, brittle, and then, behind her, something moved, something big, something crawling out of the shadows of the trees, a shape with limbs too long, a body too crooked, a mouth that split sideways, eyes like burning pitch. It reached for the woman. She didn't flee. She only looked at Elias. Run. He didn't hear it. He felt it. Elias turned and sprinted back toward the shack, stumbling, heart slamming so loud he couldn't hear anything else. Not the night insects, not the trees, not the thing that shrieked behind him with an inhuman, bone-splitting wail. He didn't stop until he was inside, door slammed shut, back pressed against wood. He shook, he gasped, he prayed. Naomi rushed out of her room. Elias! What? But he couldn't speak. Not yet. Not while the echoes of that wail still vibrated in his bones. Not while he felt the land itself alive, pulsing, restless beneath his feet. VI. When the land chooses you at dawn, Thomas sat with him at the table, listening silently as Elias told everything, every detail, every sound, every impossible thing. When Elias finished, Thomas closed his eyes and whispered something under his breath in a language Elias didn't recognize. Finally, he spoke. Marjorie Turner, Thomas said softly. Name sound familiar to you? Elias shook his head. Should, Thomas murmured. She disappeared in '92. Whole Turner family vanished. Folks said they left in the night. But folks say a lot of things they know ain't true. Naomi leaned forward. You think something killed them? No, Thomas said. I think something took them. Elias swallowed hard. And now it's back? Thomas stared at him long and heavy. It ain't back, boy. He lifted the cane again, running his fingers across the carved notches. It never left. By midday, the air over Ashford Hollow had changed. Birds were silent, horses restless, dogs refusing to go near the fields, and the soil Elias could feel it breathing under his boots, expanding, contracting, like a living lung. The land whispered, not words, not yet, but sounds, sobs, rasps, gasps. Elias heard them. Naomi heard them. Even Thomas, hardened by years of unspeakable things, glanced at the earth with a look Elias had never seen on him before. Fear, real fear. What does it want? Elias whispered. Thomas didn't answer immediately. Then, it wants truth. Naomi frowned. Truth about what? Thomas turned toward the western field. About what this town buried. The sun rose over Ashford Hollow, like an eye half opening, after a troubled sleep, slow, reluctant, and red around the edges. Elias Harper stood on the porch of the weather-worn shack he called home, one hand resting on the doorframe, the other still trembling faintly from the horrors of last night. He hadn't told Naomi everything, only enough that she knew the land wasn't right. She already believed more than he wanted her to. He could see it in the stiffness of her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the fields, as though expecting something to crawl out of them. Uncle Thomas sat at the corner of the porch, carving again into that same stick. No, not a stick, Elias realized. A stave, a ritual cane, something older than the man carrying it. Fields ain't safe today, Thomas muttered without looking up. Not for man or beast. Elias swallowed. But Mr. Halvers don't own what's under that soil. The old man spat tobacco over the steps. Ain't nobody owned that but the ones whose bones feed it. Naomi stepped out onto the porch with 2 tin cups of chicory coffee. She handed one to Elias, then hesitated before offering the other to Thomas. "Uncle, why's the land doing this? Why now?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He stared out toward the horizon, as if waiting for the land to speak first. "It's wakin'," he said finally. "And when old things wake, they don't wake gentle." Elias ran a hand through his hair. "I saw her, Uncle. I saw Marjorie Turner. She ain't restin'." Thomas's knife paused mid-carve. Naomi stiffened. "A spirit?" "Hain't," Thomas corrected. "Not the same. Ghosts come from souls tryin' to get somewhere. Haints come from souls that never got nowhere. They stuck, hurt, twisted by every wrong done to 'em." He tapped the carved cane softly. "And the land binds 'em." Elias stared across the cotton rows. "She was tryin' to warn me. Or lead you," Thomas said. "Haints don't always know the difference." The earth rumbled, then, softly, like a deep breath shifting under the ground. The sound rolled beneath the shack, under the porch, through the boards beneath their feet. Naomi whispered a prayer. Elias didn't move, because he felt something new, not just motion, attention. Something beneath the soil had noticed him last night, and it hadn't forgotten. Around mid-morning, the rattle of a buckboard wagon echoed down the dirt road. Dust kicked up behind it in a rolling cloud, and as it neared, Elias recognized the man driving. Sheriff Edgar Middleton, white, thick-shouldered, red-faced, even on cold days. The kind of man who wore authority like a second skin and cruelty like a hidden knife. Naomi tensed the moment she saw him. Thomas didn't move, didn't blink, just kept carving. Middleton pulled up in front of the shack and dismounted, boots kicking up little puffs of dust. "Harper," he barked. "That you out here?" Elias stepped off the porch. "Mornin', Sheriff. Something wrong on Halvers's land?" "No, sir. A lie. A heavy one." Middleton walked closer. "Someone said they heard screamin' from these parts last night." Elias stiffened. "Wasn't us." Middleton leaned in, squinting. "You sure 'bout that?" Before Elias could respond, Thomas's cane struck the porch floor with a sharp toke. Middleton's eyes shifted toward him. "You speakin' to the boy for a reason?" Thomas asked flatly. Middleton's nostrils flared. "Speak when spoken to, old man." Thomas's expression did not change. "I said what I said." For a moment, it seemed Middleton would push it. He always had a simmering hatred for black folks who looked him directly in the eye. But something in Thomas's stare must have unsettled him. Middleton spat on the ground instead. "Halvers says he needs the fields worked extra hard this week. Y'all best not fall behind." "We won't," Elias said calmly. "You better not." Middleton turned back toward his wagon, but then he stopped, eyes narrowing. "Why's the west field look torn up?" Elias's stomach dropped. He followed Middleton's gaze. The soil had shifted overnight. Great ridges of earth ran along the west rows like veins, as though something had crawled under the ground. The cotton stalks leaned in strange angles, some uprooted entirely. To regular eyes, maybe it looked like animal damage. But not to Elias. Not after last night. "Must be hogs," Elias said. Middleton laughed sharply. "Hogs don't move in straight lines like that." Thomas spoke quietly from the porch. "You'd be surprised what moves in lines like that." Middleton glared again, but he didn't reply. Instead, he climbed back into his wagon. "Halvers is expectin' work done. I don't care what crawls in them, fields or out of them. You fall behind, you pay for it." Elias nodded once. The sheriff rode off. Naomi exhaled shakily. "He gon' come back." Thomas set the cane across his knees. Something else gon' come first. Elias and Naomi walked the fields after the sheriff left. Thomas refused, claiming the land was listening too close today. The deeper they went into the west rows, the thicker the air felt. Heavy, moist. Like standing inside a great mouth that had not yet decided to swallow. "This ain't natural," Naomi whispered. "Even the air feel wrong." "Stay close," Elias murmured. The soil beneath their boots was warm again, almost hot. A small bird lay dead near a stalk of cotton. Body twisted unnaturally. Wings snapped in ways that didn't look like animal attack or disease. Elias crouched beside it. No blood, no marks. It looked drained, as if its life had been pulled straight out of it. Naomi gagged. What did that? Before Elias could answer, the ground trembled. Then a low, dull thump sounded beneath their feet. Naomi grabbed his arm. Eli. Another thump. Louder. Then another. Not random. Rhythmic. Like footsteps. Big ones. Elias pulled Naomi back just as the earth rose, swelling upward like something huge was pushing from beneath. He held her tight as the soil cracked open. A mound burst upward, spraying dirt. And then, from inside it, a shape began to emerge. Not a person. Not an animal. Something in between. Something wrong. A spine, long and arched like a bent tree root, rose out of the hole. Bones protruded through stretched earth-colored skin. The creature dragged itself upward, with long, twisted arms that ended in too many joints. Its head was an elongated skull wrapped in leathery flesh, with no visible eyes. Naomi screamed. Elias yanked her backward behind a row of cotton. The creature sniffed the air. The flesh of its face pulsed like a living bruise. Soil dripped from its limbs. It turned toward where Elias and Naomi hid, and then it spoke in a voice like wind rushing through hollow wood. Harper. Naomi covered her mouth. Elias stared, heart in his throat. The creature said his name. Elias. Har. For the voice stretched unnaturally, syllables cracking. Elias grabbed a branch off the ground and hurled it far across the field. The noise drew the creature's head suddenly in that direction. In a flash faster than anything that size should move, it leaped toward the sound, disappearing behind the cotton rows. Naomi nearly collapsed. Elias held her upright. We need to go. They ran quiet as possible, following the longer path around the shed and back to the shack. Naomi's breath shook violently. Elias kept glancing behind them, expecting the thing to rise out of the soil again, but nothing followed. Not yet. Thomas was waiting when they reached the porch. He didn't greet them, didn't scold them. He just stared at the field, not with fear, but with something closer to grim acceptance. You saw it, he said. Elias nodded. His voice cracked. What was that? The hollow, Thomas murmured. Part of it, leastways. Naomi's voice was still trembling. It said Elias's name. Thomas did not look surprised. It know the ones it mark. Mark? Elias stiffened. You mean it? Yes, boy. Thomas tapped the cane. It marked you last night. When you heard that, Haint's whisper, something else heard you hear it. Naomi shook her head. No, that ain't. That thing ain't from heaven or hell, Thomas said. It from the earth. This earth. Fed by every unjust death buried in it. Every scream it swallowed, every bone it claimed without a name. Elias felt his chest tighten. Why me? Thomas finally looked at him. Because you listened. Most folks go their whole lives pretending the land don't speak. You heard it. You acknowledged it. And now it wants something from you. What? Thomas breathed deeply, the sound heavy as old stone. Justice. Naomi's brows knit. For Marjorie Turner? For all of 'em, Thomas said. You saw the names, didn't you? Elias nodded. Those ain't just graves, Thomas continued. They's promises, broken ones. The old man stood slowly, clutching the cane. This ain't just hauntin', boy. This is reckoning. By evening, the sky had turned a bruised purple. Clouds rolled in from the east, thick, swollen, low enough to feel like they scraped the tops of the pines. Elias and Naomi lit 2 lanterns inside the shack. Thomas burned herbs in an old iron pot, muttering chants Elias had never heard before. What are you doing? Elias asked. Trying to keep the hollow from coming inside, Thomas said. But it getting stronger. I feel it in the boards. The house creaked. Wind pushed against the walls even though outside was still. Naomi sat on the floor, hugging her knees. Uncle, what happened to the Turners? Thomas didn't turn from the pot. They was taken by the land. Same way the hollow taken more now. Why them? Naomi whispered. Because they knew something, Thomas said. Something they shouldn't have. A knock sounded at the door. All three froze. Another knock, slow, heavy. Elias approached the door cautiously. Who there? He called. Silence. Then a woman's voice. Soft, strained. Elias. Naomi grabbed his arm. Don't you open that door. Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. Boy, step away. But Elias hesitated. The voice was so familiar, so full of sorrow, it twisted something inside him. Elias, help. A faint scratching ran down the wood. Slow, long, as though fingernails were being dragged over it. Naomi began to cry. Thomas raised the cane and pointed it at the door. That ain't Marjorie. The scratching stopped. Silence swallowed the room whole. Then the voice changed, warped, deepened, turned into something made of earth and hunger. Elias. The doorframe shook violently. Elias stumbled back. The wall behind them trembled, as though something large pressed its weight against the shack. Boards warped. The lanterns flickered. Then, a whisper at every window, every crack, every wall. A chorus of dead voices. Remember, find us, free us, or join us. The shack groaned like an animal in pain. Thomas slammed his cane against the floor. You ain't taking him. A blast of force struck the shack so sudden and powerful the lanterns blew out, plunging everything into darkness. Naomi screamed. Elias reached for her. The wind howled inside the house, though every window was shut. Something slammed into the roof, then the walls, then the ground beneath them. The land itself was trying to drag the shack into its belly. Thomas shouted over the noise, It ain't stopping! We gotta go now! Elias grabbed Naomi and the three of them bolted out the back door, sprinting across the clearing and into the tree line just as the shack's front steps collapsed inward with a thunderous crack. The land swallowed a corner of the shack whole. Thomas pulled them behind a fallen log. Stay low. Elias watched, chest heaving, as the earth churned. Boards snapped. Dust rose. The shack trembled, as if sinking. Naomi clutched Elias's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. What does it want from me? He whispered. Thomas looked at him, eyes old and sad and certain. The Hollow chosen you, and it won't stop till you do what it demand. Elias stared as the shack slowly drowned in the living soil. And what's that? Thomas lifted the cane. To uncover the truth of every name buried out there. Ashes of a home. The shack had been humble, but it had been theirs. Elias Harper stood at the edge of what remained, panting from the chaos of the night. Smoke drifted from shattered boards. Dust settled in slow, mournful clouds. The ground still pulsed faintly where the earth had heaved, as if the hollow beneath it had not quite finished a meal. Naomi trembled beside him. We can't stay here. Eli, we ain't safe. No, Elias whispered. We ain't. Thomas approached the ruin, leaning heavier on his cane than usual. The ironwood shaft throbbed with a faint glow beneath the carved symbols etched along its length. This place been touched, he murmured. It ain't never gonna be the same. Elias scanned the destroyed boards. A pot from Naomi's mother's old kitchen lay twisted in mud. The quilt she kept, folded in the corner, stitched by hands long gone, was half buried. A Sunday dress hung from a broken beam like a ghost of fabric. A life uprooted in minutes. That was the way of the South. Some horrors wore human faces, others hid beneath the soil. Tonight, both kinds had stared him down. What now? Elias asked, voice rough. Thomas answered without hesitation. We move. North Woods. There's an old foundation out there, built by freed folk trying to settle before white men burned 'em out. Naomi clutched Elias's arm. We goin' into the woods? After what we saw last night? We ain't got choice, Thomas said. The Vendin. Hollow know where you sleep now. Need to break its trail. Elias took a breath and nodded. Then we go. But as they turned away, something glimmered among the rubble. A bone, small, polished, smooth. and laid atop the destroyed boards like someone had placed it there on purpose. Elias knelt, but Thomas grabbed his shoulder sharply. "Don't you touch that!" "What is it?" Thomas lowered himself slowly to look more closely. His face tightened. "That ain't no animal bone," he said. "That's human." Naomi covered her mouth. Elias swallowed hard. "Why'd it leave this? A warning?" "No." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "A claim. They left the ruin of their home behind and slipped into the edge of the pine forest. The air there was cooler, the wind whispering through needles in uneasy breaths. Naomi kept close to Elias. Her steps were small and soft, as though afraid the ground might swallow her next. Elias, despite the fear knotted in his chest, took the lead. The moon crawled through the clouds in fractured arcs, casting pale light that made the trees look like long, dark ribs. Above them, owls hooted in low tones, unsettled by something deeper than night. The forest felt wrong, like a great animal shifting beneath its own skin. Thomas limped behind them, though his cane seemed to guide him rather than support him. The carved runes along its length pulsed faintly, the glow increasing whenever they drifted too close to the west side of the woods. "What's out that way?" Elias whispered. Thomas did not answer immediately. Then, old graves. Naomi stopped. "From slaves?" "Yes," Thomas said. "And before?" "Before? Before even this land had a name." He tapped the cane. "Hollow places got long memory, long hunger." Elias swallowed. "The names I saw. Marjorie Turner. Others. They buried in them woods?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Some, but there's others who ain't never been found." Elias looked ahead. "Then that's where the Hollow want me to go." Thomas did not disagree. By midnight, they reached the ruins of the old settlement. Only foundations remained, stone blocks swallowed by roots. Outlines of homes long burned and erased by time. A chimney stood crooked like a broken tooth. Naomi shivered. "This place feel cursed." Thomas sat slowly on a fallen beam. "Ain't cursed, just forgotten. That's what make it dangerous." Elias wandered toward the edge of the clearing. Something tugged inside him faint, like a whisper buried in bone. There, under a cluster of pines, the ground dipped unnaturally. Not like erosion or weather, like breath. Elias stepped toward it. The soil beneath his feet vibrated in the faintest pulse, almost too soft to notice, yet undeniable. Naomi grabbed his sleeve. "Don't." He gently freed himself. "I gotta see." He dropped to his knees, brushing aside pine needles. Soft earth. A mound. A grave. But it wasn't just a burial site. It was fresh turned, as if the soil had been stirred recently. Elias dug deeper, fingers sinking into damp dirt. Then his hand hit something smooth. Not wood, not stone, bone. He froze. Naomi gasped and turned away. Thomas hobbled closer. "Pull it out slow, boy." Elias did. The bone slid from the soil like it wanted to be found. A rib, white as moonlight, clean, too clean. Elias's skin crawled. "This ain't been in the ground long." "No," Thomas said quietly. "It ain't." The air shifted. A cold wind brushed the clearing. The pine branches trembled without sound, and then Elias heard it. A hum, low, mournful, like someone singing under the earth. Naomi clutched his shoulder in terror. "We need to go. Eli, please." But Elias couldn't move. His breath fogged in front of him, even though the night wasn't cold enough for it. The hum grew louder, until it shaped itself into words. "Help." Elias's eyes widened. Naomi backed away. Thomas's cane glowed fiercely. Elias lowered his ear toward the grave. The humming became a voice. "Find me." The soil rippled. Naomi screamed. A hand burst out of the grave. White bone, fingers grasping at the air. Elias stumbled back, falling onto his elbows. The skeletal hand clawed the air frantically, the bones shaking as if in agony. Thomas struck the ground with his cane. "Back!" he commanded. A shockwave rippled outward, sending pine needles flying, and the skeletal hand sinking violently back into the soil. The ground clenched around it like a closing mouth. Silence fell. Naomi sobbed. Elias stared at the grave in horror. That thing ain't alive. It ain't dead. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. That's the hollow's doin'. That grave weren't tryin' to hurt you. What was it tryin' to do then? Elias whispered. Thomas looked at him with ancient, mournful eyes. Beg. They camped near the ruins, a small fire burning low. The woods creaked uneasily. Naomi sat close to the flames, trembling. Elias stared into the fire. Shadows danced across the ruins. His mind replayed the skeletal hand, the whispers, the humming from beneath the earth. Thomas smoked silently. Finally, Elias spoke. You said the hollow wants justice, but how am I supposed to give that? I ain't nothing but a farmer. Thomas tapped his cane. Not anymore. Naomi looked up sharply. Don't say that. It the truth, Thomas said. The land choosin' him. Haints crying out his name. Hollow speakin' through roots and bones. The boy can't go back to plowin' dirt now. Elias stared at Thomas. Tell me what it want. Truth, Thomas said. Unearthed truth. The kind folks been buryin' for 50 years. Elias frowned. You talkin' about the Turners? All of 'em, Thomas murmured. Every way, soul wronged on Halvers's property. Every life taken quiet. Every grave hidden deep. Naomi shivered. We talkin' about murder. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You think the South got graves that ain't tied to murder? Elias clenched his jaw. What happened to Marjorie Turner? He asked. Thomas studied the fire. Halvers's daddy happened. Naomi gasped. But they said. They lied, Thomas said sharply. Said she ran off. Said she stole something and fled. Truth is, she saw something she wasn't meant to. Something they buried under the west fields. Elias felt his skin crawl. What'd she see? Thomas took a deep breath. A pit. Elias's stomach dropped. A pit? Of bodies. Naomi covered her face with both hands. Elias felt cold all the way through. Why would they? Who? Thomas cut him off. White men don't need reasons to bury black bodies. They just bury 'em where folks won't find 'em. He tapped the cane once on the ground, and the hollow remembered. The fire crackled low, the woods hushed. For a moment, they sat in uneasy stillness. Then a whisper, soft, right behind Elias's ear. Hello. Elias leapt to his feet. Naomi shrieked. Thomas grabbed his cane. Shadows moved between the trees, not like animals, like shapes made of darkness itself. Another whisper drifted across the clearing. Elias. Elias spun. Show yourself. The trees rustled, though there was no wind. Roots wriggled across the ground like skeletal fingers. A figure stepped out from behind a massive pine, a young woman, barefoot, clothes tattered and soaked in dirt, skin pale as bone. Marjorie Turner. But her eyes, they were hollow pits filled with swarming shadows. Naomi screamed and clutched Elias. Thomas rose, holding the cane between them and the apparition. Back! Hain't! You ain't welcome here! Marjorie did not flinch. She didn't blink. She only raised her hand slowly, pointing toward the west, toward Halvers's land, toward the pit. Elias trembled. You want me to go there? Her head tilted, her mouth opened. Only earth poured out. Dark soil spilled down her chin, pattering softly on the ground. Her voice gurgled through it. They buried us. Naomi sobbed. Find the pit. The wind died. The forest stilled. Every insect, every animal went silent. Marjorie's form flickered like a flame, being blown sideways. Free us. Her face twisted, then not in rage, but in profound, unbearable grief. And then her body collapsed into dirt. No scream, no sound, just soil dropping where a woman had stood. Naomi fainted into Elias's arms. Thomas whispered a prayer. And Elias Harper, heart racing, breath shallow, soul shaking, knew the truth. The hollow would not release him. Not unless he unearthed what the land had been forced to swallow. Elias laid Naomi gently by the fire. Thomas sprinkled herb ash around her to keep the hollow's whispers away. Then Thomas knelt beside Elias. "She showed you the pit." Elias nodded. "I saw where she pointed." Thomas gripped his shoulder. "It gon' fight you. The hollow ain't just bones and shadows. It's wrath. Old wrath. If you dig where they don't want you diggin', you gon' stir every unquiet soul in them fields." Elias stared toward the west. "Then I'll face 'em." Thomas's face softened proud, worried, ancient. Your mama's son. She wasn't scared of truth neither." Elias swallowed hard. "Will you help me?" Thomas looked at the woods, at the shifting shadows, at the restless trees. "Yes," he said. "But know this, once you dig that pit open, ain't no turnin' back." Elias didn't hesitate. "I ain't turnin' back." A long silence hung between them. Then, Thomas pressed the glowing cane into the earth. "Then, we started dawn. That's when spirit's weakest." Elias looked down at Naomi, still unconscious but breathing soft. He brushed her hair back gently. Then he whispered a promise, one only the trees heard. "I'll bring the truth up from the dark." Above them, a single pine branch cracked, and far in the distance, the land rumbled in warning, as if something beneath the soil knew what he planned, and was already waiting. Elias Harper had not slept. The night had groaned with restless whispers, the pines bending as if they carried the weight of unseen bodies. Naomi lay wrapped in Thomas's herb-marked blanket, trembling even in sleep. Thomas sat cross-legged near the dying fire, the ironwood cane resting across his knees like a weapon forged from an older world. Elias stared toward the west, toward Halvers's land, toward the pit. When the horizon finally began to pale into the bruised blue of early morning, Thomas rose slowly. Every joint in his body popped like old wood shifting in the cold. "You still sure about this?" he asked. Elias didn't look away from the west. "I ain't got choice. The hollow won't let me be." Thomas nodded once. "Then we walk." Naomi stirred. Her eyes opened to slivers of frightened brown. "You goin'?" she whispered. Elias knelt beside her. "I need to." Naomi grabbed his wrist. "What if you don't come back?" Elias forced a small smile. "I will." "Promise?" He hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "Promise." Thomas tightened the straps on his satchel. "Stay here, girl," he told Naomi gently. "Circle of herbs will keep you safe. Spirits don't cross it easy." Naomi swallowed, staring at the glowing ember lines Thomas had drawn in the dirt. "You better come back with him." Thomas smiled faintly, but his eyes were heavy. "I'll try." Elias touched Naomi's cheek, then stood. The sun had barely begun to rise when they stepped into the forest. The trees leaned inward as if to watch. The hollow breathed deep. And Elias Harper walked toward the truth. The walk west took nearly an hour, though the pines grew thicker, older, hungrier. Elias could feel it something wrong underfoot. The earth felt tense, listening, waiting for him to dig. When they reached the edge of Halvers's fields, dawn had finally stretched its copper light across the tall grass. Elias froze. The fields were empty, too empty. Yesterday, the farmhands had been working the rows, overseen by Halvers's barking orders. But today, not one person in sight. No horses, no tools left out. Just wind combing the crops like fingers brushing hair from a corpse's face. Thomas swore under his breath. He know. "Halvers?" Elias asked. "Aye, something scared him off. Or warned him. Either way, he cleared the fields." Elias clenched his fists. "Then we dig before he comes back," Thomas grunted. "You lead. The hollow callin' you stronger now. It'll show you the way." Elias stepped into the fields. Immediately, the air thickened. The sun dimmed slightly, as if something high above had drawn a veil across it. Elias felt the pull, a tug deep inside his chest, not painful, but unavoidable. It dragged his steps slightly left, slightly forward, then sharply west across the rows. "Feel that?" he asked, breathlessly. Thomas nodded grimly. Hollow guidin' you straight." Elias followed the invisible pull for nearly half a mile, the tall grass whispering along their legs. The sound felt like 100 ghostly hands brushing past. Then Elias stopped. His breath caught. His chest tightened. The air here was colder, and the ground dipped. Not naturally, not by accident. A long indentation, 30 feet wide and sinking several feet down, scarred the field like a wound that refused to heal. The earth here was dark, rich, heavy, and it smelled wrong. Rot, metal, old blood. Thomas's breath shuddered. It, Elias nodded. The pit, not uncovered, but barely buried. Thomas knelt and pressed his palm to the soil. A tremor ran beneath them. "Spirits restless here," Thomas whispered. "They feel you. They waitin'." Elias dropped to his knees. He began to dig. Elias did not have a shovel, only his hands. But the soil gave way under his fingers easier than it should have, as though the earth itself wanted to be opened. Thomas dug beside him, using the flat end of his cane to loosen packed dirt. Each strike sent faint ripples through the soil as if the ground winced. After only a few minutes, too few, their fingers scraped something hard. Elias froze. Thomas brushed the dirt aside. Bone. A skull. Elias stared at the hollow eye sockets, the fractured crown. But then his hand brushed another skull beside it, and another, and another. 5, 7, 10. All packed tightly together, layered like the ribs of a great buried beast. Elias felt his stomach twist violently. Dear God. Thomas shook his head. God didn't watch over this place. Elias exhaled shakily, brushing more soil away. The skulls were not alone. Tangled among them were ribs, arms, jawbones, a mass grave, black folks, dozens of them, buried together without markers, without mercy, without witness. The dirt around them wasn't normal. It was sticky in places, darkened by old fluids that had seeped from the bodies over decades. Elias's hands trembled. How? How many? Thomas's face hardened with a pain Elias had only seen once on the day Thomas had buried his own daughter. Too many. Elias swallowed. Marjorie saw this. Thomas nodded. Saul Halvers's daddy dumpin' bodies in here at night. Folks who worked the land. Folks who tried to leave. Folks who talked back. Elias felt bile rise into his throat. Then, something brushed his hand. Soft. Elias jerked back. A finger bone rolled out of the dirt. But it didn't fall naturally. It slid. As though pushed. Elias's breath frosted in the morning air. Thomas stiffened. They waken. The soil shifted. A whisper hissed through the pit. Cold. Elias's skin crawled. Another voice raspier. Hurt. A third broken. Remember. Elias gritted his teeth. What do you want? The voices harmonized in a single tortured chorus. Justice. The ground shook. A skull rolled toward Elias, stopping against his knee, as if demanding acknowledgement. Elias met the empty sockets. I'll give you justice, he whispered. I swear it. For a moment, silence fell. Then the soil pulsed beneath their feet once, like a heartbeat. Thomas stood shakily. We gotta open the rest. Free as many as we can before. He went still. Elias looked up sharply. Before what? Thomas stared over Elias's shoulder, face draining of all color. Before he comes. Elias turned. At the top of the rise, a figure approached. Riding a black horse, wide-brim hat, long coat, cold posture, Sheriff Dalton. And he wasn't alone. 6 armed men rode behind him. Halvers was one of them, hat low, jaw tight, rifle strapped across his saddle. Elias staggered to his feet. Thomas grabbed his arm. Boy, don't run. They'll shoot you in the back. Elias's stomach sank. The men stopped 20 yards away. Dalton's voice drifted across the field, smooth as oil on water. Well now, ain't this a sight? Halvers spat into the dirt. I told you they'd come sniffin' round. Truth always brings out the vermin. Thomas lifted his cane. You shut your mouth, Samuel Halvers. These folks you buried here were people. Every last one, Halvers sneered. They were property. Elias lunged forward, but Thomas held him back with surprising strength. Dalton dismounted slowly. You boys. Been digging holes you ain't meant to dig. Elias's hands balled into fists. You knew. All these years. Dalton smiled faintly. Course I did. My daddy helped cover it up. The men behind him chuckled. Thomas clenched his jaw. You gonna kill us too? Toss us in the pit with the rest? Dalton shrugged. If it keeps the county quiet. His hand drifted toward his gun. Halvers leaned forward on his horse, voice low and venomous. You just don't learn your place, do you, Elias Harper? Elias stared at him with a hatred hot enough to burn the air. Dalton's hand tightened around his gun. Time to finish what my daddy started, he said. Then the earth moved. Not like a tremor, like a rising. Like something beneath the soil was pushing up. Dalton looked down, confused. What in? The ground beneath his feet split. A hand burst out. Skeletal. Clawing. Halvers screamed as the earth heaved under the horses, knocking them sideways. Dalton tried to pull back, but a second skeletal arm wrapped around his ankle, then a third, then dozens. Bones erupted through the soil, dragging themselves upward, rib cages cracking through the dirt like dead flowers blooming in reverse. Elias stumbled back into the pit as skulls rose around him, not threatening, but awakening. Dalton screamed in terror. Get him off! Get him off! The bones pulled harder. Thomas shouted, Move! Elias! Elias grabbed the edge of the pit and scrambled out. Halvers fired wildly into the ground, but his bullet hit nothing living. Dalton's men tried to run, but the hollow had no intention of letting them go. The earth collapsed under the horses. The animals shrieked. Men tumbled. Dalton desperately clawed at the ground, but skeletal fists locked around his wrists, chest, throat. Halvers crawled backward, face twisted in horror. No, stay back! A skull slid across the soil toward him, jaw clacking. Thomas whispered, Judgment Day. Halvers scrambled to his feet and fled, but the ground swallowed his leg up to the knee. He screamed. Elias watched, breath frozen in his lungs. This wasn't justice. It was retribution. Dalton disappeared beneath a swarm of skeletal limbs. One of the other men tried to climb a tree, but the roots twisted violently, dragging him down. The field writhed, and the hollow devoured them. Every scream was choked by earth. Every shot faded under soil. Every body sank like it belonged there. When the last cry died, silence fell. The sun broke through the clouds. Elias stared at the pit, shaking. Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. You ain't done this. They did. Elias swallowed. What now? Thomas looked west. The earth still breathed. The hollow's awake now, he whispered, and it ain't going back to sleep. As they turned to leave, Elias felt something tug his pant leg. He froze, slowly looked down. A skeletal hand, small, delicate, had emerged from the pit, not pulling him down, holding something out. A ring, gold, inscribed with an M. Elias took it gently. Thomas exhaled. Marjorie. Elias closed his fingers around it. A whisper drifted from the pit. Thank you. Elias's eyes stung. He closed the pit with a final handful of soil. The land sighed. And the hollow quieted. For now. The sheriff's office door shut behind us, with a hollow thud that sounded far too final, like a gate closing on a cage. Outside, the horseflies swarmed the eaves, tapping against the windows, as if desperate to witness whatever was about to unfold. Sheriff Dalton pulled a chair from his desk and set it directly across from Tom. The legs screeched across the wood floor. A warning sound. Sit. Tom obeyed, posture rigid, hands clasped between his knees. Dalton's jaw flexed. Now tell me again, slowly, exactly what happened in them trees. The room smelled of dust, leather, and the faint metallic scent of the telegraph machine resting along the wall. In the corner, the deputy watched us, with narrowed eyes, tapping a pencil against his thigh, nervous, steady, rhythmic. The sound only made Tom's breathing faster, louder. I told you already, Tom whispered. Twice. You'll tell it till it comes out clean, Dalton replied. And I'll decide what parts make sense. Tom's eyes flicked toward me. He was afraid of saying it out loud, afraid the sheriff might decide he was insane, or lying, or guilty. But I nodded to him. Go on. He exhaled, bracing himself. The woods went quiet, Tom said. That ain't right for midday. No birds, no wind. Even the bugs disappeared like someone hushed the whole forest. Dalton cocked his head, skeptical, but listening. Then I saw him, silhouette first, standing between the rows of corn. Tall, still, didn't look alive. His head was turned up, like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. Dalton lowered himself to the desk chair, leaning in. You sure it was a man? Tom swallowed. I ain't sure it was anything I ever saw before. That hung in the air. I stepped forward. Sheriff. Tom was pale as bone when I found him. Whatever he saw ain't something he. Dalton's hand lifted, silencing me. I'll get to you, Levi. For now, he talks. Tom placed his shaking hands on the table. His clothes were old, dusty, looked like what a field worker might have worn in the century before. But the face. He stopped, pressing thumb and forefinger to his closed eyelids, as though trying to scrub away the memory. His eyes weren't on me. They were rolled back, all white. The deputy quietly took a step backward. Dalton sat motionless, but a crease deepened above his brow. You're saying you saw a ghost? No, Tom replied. Ghosts ain't solid. Ghosts don't make the corn bow when they... Now, I saw the sheriff's breath shift. He leaned back, staring at Tom as though he were seeing him for the first time. Boy, are you drunk? No, Sheriff. High? No. Touched in the head? Tom's jaw quivered. No, sir. Dalton grunted. Then you're lying. I'm not. Then you're cursed. The room froze. No one moved. Dalton himself looked surprised he'd said it aloud. But the moment the words entered the air, something inside me tightened because I had seen the same thought forming behind Tom's eyes. The sheriff tapped the back of a knuckle against the desk. We'll talk more. His tone went cold. But first, what were you even doing near the Claymore property? You know better than that. At the mention of the Claymore name, Deputy Reed flinched. Tom stammered. I ain't go near the house, Sheriff. I swear. I was just cutting through the outer woods, like always. I spoke up. He was trying to avoid the main road. White men been giving him trouble these past weeks. Dalton's gaze slid to me. He didn't like being reminded of what he already knew but refused to address. That ain't relevant, he muttered. It is if it means he had a reason to be in those woods. Dalton lifted a brow. So you're his mouth now? If it keeps him alive, I'll be whatever he needs. The sheriff's mustache twitched at that anger or annoyance or maybe something like reluctant respect. Hard to tell. He turned back to Tom. Look, you trespass near Claymore land, and they'll put a bullet in you before they think twice. You saw a man standing in their corn, acting strange. You sure it wasn't one of theirs? No Claymore man would have been standing like that. Standing like what? Like he was waiting on someone to come pick him out the soil. Dalton stopped tapping. Tom continued, voice trembling. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move, just stared straight up at the sky like something was calling him from above. Then, he hesitated. Then what? Dalton asked. He smiled. The pencil stopped tapping. Deputy Reed's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. That smile wasn't right, Tom whispered. Too wide, too long. Like it was spreading. I stepped closer, my own skin crawling, because I had heard that same description before from the story of the man who went missing last spring. The one found near the mill with his mouth stretched unnaturally as though something had tugged his face into a shape it wasn't built to hold. Dalton's voice fell nearly to a whisper. What'd you do then? I ran. You left the woods fast as your legs could carry you, didn't you? Dalton asked. No, Tom said, and all three of us stared at him. What stopped you? I asked. He looked up slowly, terror etched into the lines around his eyes. The room turned colder. Dalton leaned forward. What did he say? Tom shook his head, voice hollow. I don't know the words. Wasn't English. Wasn't anything. Sounded like roots shifting underground. Deep, slow, old. Deputy Reed's boot scraped back across the floorboards. Sheriff, maybe we should. Maybe Reverend Coates ought. Dalton shut him up with one look. Then he stood abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. He reached for his hat. Both of you stay put, he ordered. I'm riding out to that field. Tom shot to his feet. Don't go alone. You let me worry about myself. Sheriff, listen to me, Tom said urgently. When that thing smiled, the corn bent inward, like it was leaning closer, like it was listening to him too. Dalton froze mid-step. Tom whispered, That ain't no man. I expected Dalton to bark at him, slam the door, pretend none of this frightened him. But he didn't. Instead, his voice dropped. You boys wait here. And if either of you leave this office before I get back, God help you. He walked out, and we waited. The minutes dragged like hours. The telegraph clicked twice, murmuring some distant message from Savannah. The deputy paced until his boots wore a track into the boards. Tom stared at the floor, hands gripping the edges of the chair as though holding himself together. I stepped to the window. Down the road, Dalton rode hard toward the Claymore land, dust rising in a pale gray cloud behind him. The sight made something deep in my chest twist. You think he'll find it? Deputy Reed murmured. I think, I said. He'll wish he hadn't. The deputy stopped pacing. You ever seen anything like what he's describing? I thought of all the strange things we'd heard over the past year. The whispers from the old midwives, the stories from field hands, the sudden sickness in livestock that left no wound, only empty eyes. And I thought of the missing man last spring with the torn-open smile. Yes, I said softly. Not exactly the same, but close, too close. Reed paled. Lord have mercy. Tom finally looked up. He won't believe it till he sees it. I don't think he wants to believe it, I replied. But the world don't much care what we want. Silence settled again. Heavy, suffocating. Then bang! We all jumped as the back door slammed open. A young boy burst in, sweaty, gasping, barely 12. Sheriff, he wheezed. Where's the sheriff? He ain't here, the deputy said. Calm down, kid. What is it? The boy gulped air, tears in his eyes. It's the Claymore field, he said. Something happened. Tom stiffened so violently his chair scooted back. I crouched to the boy's level. What did you see? He sobbed once, shaking. The corn, it's wrong. All bent the same direction. Like something pushed through from underneath. And there's a line of footprints, Tom whispered. Human? The boy shook his head. No. Deputy Reed's breath hitched. Sheriff's riding straight into that. The boy nodded frantically. He's already in the field. I saw his horse at the fence. He didn't answer when I yelled. Oh, God, Reed whispered. Tom stood. We gotta go. Reed hesitated. Sheriff said, he ain't here to stop us, I said. And he might not be coming back if we don't move. The boy's chest heaved. Please, somebody has to help him. I grabbed my coat. Tom, Reed, we leave now. Reed shook his head violently. I ain't going anywhere near Claymore land. You know what they'll do to me if they see me on their property? I stared him dead in the eye. You think the Claymores are the worst thing in that field right now? Reed's face went ash gray. Tom had already pushed open the door. Sheriff saved my life once, he said quietly. I ain't letting him die out there if I can stop it. I followed him into the sunlight. Reed cursed under his breath, grabbed his rifle, and ran after us. The ride to Claymore land was quiet, too quiet. Even the horses seemed reluctant to approach the fields. The land stretched before us in wide, endless rows. But something was different. The corn wasn't standing upright anymore. Every single stalk, hundreds, maybe thousands of them leaned inward, forming a narrow corridor that curved deep into the field, like the throat of some living thing. Reed's horse reared back. Hell no. I ain't going in there. I scanned the ground. There, in the soft dirt, were the marks the boy mentioned. Deep indentations, uneven, like something walking on limbs longer than a man's. Tom swallowed. This is what I saw. Sheriff somewhere in there, Reed whispered. I can't do this. You can, I said. He's your sheriff, the only decent man with a badge in 3 counties. You leave him, and you'll never forgive yourself. Reed closed his eyes. His lips trembled. Then he lifted the rifle and nodded. We stepped into the corridor. The corn brushed against our shoulders and arms, bending inward like brittle hands reaching for us. Every few steps I felt the faintest tremor beneath my boots, something shifting deep under the soil. Reed whispered, "Why is it so warm?" "It's the middle of October." Tom was breathing through his mouth, trying not to faint. "Something's heating the ground." I knelt and pressed 2 fingers to the dirt. Warm, too warm, like the earth itself had a fever. We moved deeper. The rows narrowed. The corridor curved sharply to the right, then dipped into a hollow. That's when we saw the hat. Sheriff Dalton's brown hat, lying upside down on the ground as though dropped in a hurry. Reed's voice cracked. "Sheriff?" No answer. Tom stepped forward. "There's something ahead," he pointed. "A clearing. A perfect circle cut into the corn, about 30 feet wide." The stalks around its edges bent backward as though blown by a single powerful breath. In the center lay something dark, cloth, a coat, a sheriff's coat, and beside it something else, a hole. A deep, perfectly round hole in the earth, maybe 6 feet across. Soil crumbled around the rim, as if clawed from within. Tom whispered, "Lord." He got pulled under. Reed choked on the words. No, he ain't dead. He can't be." A sound rose from the hole, a whisper, deep, wet, sliding. Tom grabbed my arm, knuckles white. "That's the sound, the same sound I heard him speak." Reed stepped backward. We need to run." The whisper rose, louder, becoming distinct, becoming words in a language older than the soil beneath us. Then something moved in the hole, slow, shifting, climbing. Reed raised his rifle, shaking violently. Don't let it out!" But it was already rising. Something pale, something long, something shaped like a hand. No, not a hand, a root. Tom screamed, "Run!" But I couldn't move. Not yet. Because something else surfaced behind the root. Something wearing a badge, a shoulder, a face. Sheriff Dalton. But he wasn't alive, and he wasn't dead. His eyes were rolled white. His mouth stretched in that terrible, impossible smile. Tom grabbed me and yanked. "Levy!" The sheriff, or the thing wearing his skin, began climbing out, fingers and roots tangled together. The corn leaned in, trembling, as though bowing to him. Reed fired. The bullet tore through Dalton's chest. He didn't flinch. He just smiled wider. The root around his neck tightened, pulling him upright, lifting him slightly above the ground like a puppet on an invisible string. Tom screamed, "Run now!" We ran, and the hollow behind us filled with a sound that would follow me the rest of my life. The sheriff's laugh, except it wasn't his. It belonged to something living under the earth. Elias Harper staggered out of the cornfield, lungs burning, heart hammering like a blacksmith's drum. The air smelled of wet soil, sweat, and something far fouler rot mingled with iron, a metallic tang that clawed at the back of his throat. Behind him, the hollow remained alive. He could feel it in the way the corn leaned unnaturally, in the faint tremor under his boots, in the whispering that had not yet ceased. Deputy Reed trailed beside him, pale as ash, rifle shaking in his hands. Thomas limped carefully, cane tapping against the dirt, eyes darting in every direction. The 3 of them made it only a few 100 yards before they had to stop. Elias sank to his knees, gripping the earth. His fingers left streaks in the soil. His ears still echoed with that twisted laughter, the sound that had crawled out of the pit along with Sheriff Dalton. It was no longer human, no longer alive, no longer recognizable. Thomas bent over. hand on Elias's shoulder.
Boy, that hollow, it don't care what you do. It's ancient, angry, and it remembers every wrong done to it.
Elias turned to him, mouth dry. And the sheriff? He's gone, Thomas said quietly, almost tenderly. Or at least what they made him into is gone. Don't think on it too long, or it'll eat what's left of your mind. Reed's voice cut the air, shaking. He killed men, things under the field. Those aren't men anymore. Thomas nodded. You saw. That's the hollow's justice. And it's far from finished. Elias swallowed hard, jaw tight. Then we follow it? Thomas's eyes narrowed. Not blindly. We go to the river. That's where the old ones sleep. That's where Marjorie's warning leads. If we survive the hollow in the fields, we'll find the pit's mother. The journey to the river was slow. The forest thickened as the sun climbed. But even in daylight, the shadows were restless. Every few minutes, Elias thought he glimpsed something moving behind a tree or along the horizon, always just beyond clear sight, always too tall or wrong to be human. We need to keep moving, Thomas said. The hollow can't follow us past water that runs free. It hates it. Can't cross unless it drags something first, Reed muttered under his breath. You mean it'll drag us into the soil if we slow down? That's the idea, Thomas said grimly. 100 years of buried hate don't forgive the living. Elias pressed on, feeling the tightness in his chest grow heavier. The field of Claymore had changed him, shaken something out of him he didn't know he had. Not just fear, but a deep, gnawing recognition that some of the world's horrors weren't human, weren't meant to be reasoned with, and were far older than any law. Hours passed. The forest thinned. The ground sloped downward toward a bend in the river, a wide, slow-moving current that reflected the early afternoon light like molten silver. The riverbank was muddy, trampled, and littered with remnants of old bones, small and large, some charred black, some bleached white. This is it, Thomas whispered. The hollow knows it, feels it. It waits across the water. Elias knelt to touch the river. The current was cold, clear, and deceptively calm. His reflection shivered on the surface, fractured by ripples. I don't like it, Reed said. Something about this water. It's wrong. You said it yourself, Thomas replied. The hollow hates running water. It can't stand it, but it's watching, waiting, testing. You can feel its eyes in the soil, can't you? Elias did, and he hated it. There was a small, broken boat at the bank, half rotted but functional. Thomas tested it, then motioned for us to climb in. The river looked shallow in places, but Elias had seen enough to know depth was not the only danger, not with something like the hollow. As we paddled across, the silence pressed against our ears. No birds, no wind, not even the usual chirping of insects, just water lapping against the boat and something beneath it, something moving. Elias gripped the paddle tightly. Do you hear that? Thomas nodded. Roots, branches, bones. They're stirring under the river. They'll try to grab if we slow down. Reed trembled. I ain't meant for this. I ain't. Elias shot him a hard glance. Ain't none of us meant for this, but we're alive because of it. Halfway across, the water stirred violently. Shadows twisted beneath the surface. Something long and sinuous slid under the boat, brushing the hull like a snake with bone teeth. Reed screamed, tipping the vessel dangerously. Thomas shoved the paddle through the water, steadying us. Quiet. Don't give it reason to strike. The shadow withdrew slowly, but the river seemed darker now, the reflection warped. Elias felt a prickle along his neck. Something had been watching, waiting, hungry. When we reached the opposite bank, Thomas's cane struck the soil. The ironwood glowed faintly. He muttered a prayer under his breath, half in English, half in some language Elias did not recognize. The bank opened onto a small clearing. Muddy, trampled ground formed a circle surrounded by pine and willow. The river curved around it, hugging the land like a protective arm. And in the center lay a depression, a massive pit, larger than anything Elias had seen before. Its edges were jagged, raw, as if torn open recently. But the true horror was what peeked from within. Bone. Thousands of bones. Skulls stacked like stones. rib cages intertwined, hands clutching teeth or earth. Some were charred black, others were fossilized. Elias swallowed hard. This wasn't just a mass grave, it was a cathedral of the dead, the foundation of something ancient and terrible. Thomas stepped forward. The mother pit, Marjorie's last warning. I followed, heart hammering. What is it? Thomas shook his head. Something older than the claymores, older than the fields. Something that remembers the first chains, the first bodies buried alive, the first screams swallowed by the earth. This is its altar. Reed vomited into the river, trembling. I can't. Elias grabbed his shoulder. We have to. We're the only ones who can put this right. We approached the edge of the pit cautiously. The air was cold, unnatural, like a frozen breath from the soil. Elias's stomach churned as he glimpsed the bones shifting slowly, almost imperceptibly. The hollow was waking. Do we dig? Reed whispered. No, Thomas said firmly. We do not dig. We do not disturb. We ask. Elias frowned. Ask? The hollow will only reveal its full truth if it knows you respect it, Thomas said. Otherwise, it destroys. The three of us knelt. Elias laid his palms on the rim of the pit, feeling the vibrations of countless bones settling beneath his hands. He whispered, trembling, We are here to honor you, to give you justice, to free those who were stolen from this world. The pit responded. The bones rattled. A deep, resonant hum rose from within, vibrating through the air and through our bones. Shadows formed on the far side of the clearing figures, twisted and skeletal, but moving with intelligence, not mindless hunger. Elias recognized faces. Marjorie Turner, countless others from the fields, their eyes hollow, but somehow aware. Thomas's voice carried above the hum. They hear you, Elias. Speak. Name the wrongs. Speak the truth. Elias swallowed. Halvers, Dalton, every soul they buried, every life they stole, we remember you. The hum rose to a deafening pitch. The shadows swirled, forming a cyclone of bone and darkness above the pit. Elias could feel a pull, gentle but insistent. The hollow wasn't attacking, it was beckoning. Then we saw it, a shape taller than the trees, darker than shadow, rising slowly from the center of the pit. It had no face, only a smooth obsidian surface that reflected nothing. Its limbs were long and twisted, ending in jagged shapes like broken branches. And as it rose, Elias understood it was the embodiment of every injustice, every stolen life, every buried scream. The hollow's voice echoed in his mind. Truth, blood, free, Thomas whispered. This is it. You hold the key. Speak the truth, Elias Harper. Speak it and honor the dead. Elias swallowed hard. Every muscle in his body quivered, but he forced himself to speak. We remember you. We see you. We honor the lives they tried to erase. We will not forget. The shape paused, quivering. Then, in a movement so fast it blurred, it struck the pit. The soil exploded outward, sending dirt, roots, and bone flying in every direction. The river churned violently, like a tidal wave had erupted from the ground. Water splashed against our knees. The hollow loomed over us, immense, terrifying, unearthly, but Elias felt something else, a strange calm, like a weight lifting. He continued, You are not forgotten. You are not silent. You are seen! The bones in the pit rattled and lifted, forming a bridge across the river. The hollow's form shimmered, growing translucent, ethereal, and the twisted, broken figures from the edges of the clearing stepped forward, walking over the water toward us. Reed dropped to his knees. It's letting them go. Thomas smiled faintly, exhausted. The dead walk free, finally. The hollow let out a sound like wind through tombs. Then, slowly, it sank back into the pit, leaving the clearing calm, silent, and the river flowing gently once more. Elias, shaking, looked at the river. The water was calm. Marjorie's ring glimmered in his hand. He slipped it back into his pocket, feeling the weight of what he had witnessed. Reed stood shakily.
Are they gone?
No, Thomas said. They're free, and we have a promise to keep. To ensure the living remember them, to tell their names. Elias nodded.
We'll remember. We'll honor them.
For the first time since the hollow had awakened, the sun shone clearly on the riverbank. And somewhere in the distance, the pines whispered approval. The riverbank was silent, save for the gentle murmur of water flowing around exposed roots and debris from the mother pit. Elias Harper's knees were muddy, his hands blackened from the soil, and his lungs burned with exertion. Thomas sat beside him, cane tapping rhythmically on a root, head bowed in quiet prayer. Reed's pale face betrayed the remnants of terror, but even he seemed to breathe easier now. The dead were free. The hollow had receded. And yet, there was a tension in the air, a lingering warning that our troubles were far from over.
Do you feel that?
Thomas murmured. Elias glanced around the clearing. The river sparkled innocently, the sunlight dancing across it.
Feel what?
Thomas's hand hovered above the soil. The weight, the memory. The hollow is gone from the pit. But it isn't gone. The land remembers, boy. Every hand that held a whip, every chain that struck flesh, every scream buried beneath the soil. That history clings, and it doesn't forgive easily. Reed shivered. So, it's still out there? Thomas nodded. It's always out there. Sometimes it sleeps, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it teaches those who dare tread too close. Elias clenched his fists.
Then we make sure nobody forgets.
Thomas's cane tapped again. That's part of it, but we also survive what's left. The Claymores, Halvers, and those who would deny what we've just witnessed. The journey back to Dry Creek was quiet, uneasy. Even in daylight, the pines seemed to whisper and sway with their own will. Birds avoided the path, and the wind carried voices that weren't entirely wind. Elias stayed close to Thomas, trying to steady his thoughts. He had seen things that no one in the county would believe, things that would brand him insane if spoken aloud. Yet, somewhere deep in his chest, he felt the hollow warmth of purpose. They had honored the dead. That was something. Halfway through the forest, a rustle stopped them. The three froze. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, lanky, coat torn and filthy, face obscured by shadow and grime. Elias's breath caught. Is that? Reed whispered. Thomas exhaled slowly. One of them. Or someone trying to warn us. The figure stepped closer. In the sunlight, Elias could finally see the eyes, hollow, blackened, yet aware. The hands reached forward, trembling. A note, soaked in mud and grime, dropped at Elias's feet. He picked it up. The words were scratched into the paper with something sharp, trembling. They are coming. Halvers is not the last. The hollow remembers. The blood calls. Prepare. Reed's hands trembled. What does it mean? Thomas's jaw tightened. It means we haven't seen the worst. And the hollow is patient, more patient than any living thing. Returning to Dry Creek felt surreal. The town seemed untouched, ordinary at first glance. Wooden storefronts, dirt roads, and the familiar bell from the general store. Yet subtle shifts made Elias's stomach twist. Children avoided their gaze, muttering to themselves. Dogs barked incessantly at shadows no one else seemed to notice. Smoke drifted from chimneys in odd patterns, curling like whispers toward the sky. At the local inn, the innkeeper's face turned pale when he saw Elias. "You've been near the Claymore fields, haven't you?" he asked, voice trembling. Elias clenched his jaw. "And if I have?" "You're not the only one. People have gone missing in the last week. More than usual. Folks who wander the woods, or near the river." He trailed off, eyes darting toward the windows. Thomas placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "We've stirred something," he said quietly. "Something the town has long ignored, and now it's restless." Reed whispered, almost to himself. "I thought we were supposed to free them." "Yes," Elias said. But freeing them means the memory stays alive, and some of the living do not want to remember. That night, Elias could not sleep. From the cabin's small window, he watched the forest sway unnaturally. Shadows moved beneath the pines, long, creeping, and silent. Whispers drifted, soft and unintelligible, yet unmistakably human. Thomas and Reed were already awake, sitting by a small fire. The flames cast long shadows on the walls, flickering across the maps and notes Elias had gathered about the Claymore land and the fields. "They call," Thomas whispered, voice rough. "Not the dead. Not the hollow. Others, living, curious, jealous, angry. The hollow freed some, but it also reminds everyone of what they've buried. And some people, some of them want it buried again." Elias's stomach turned. "You mean people in Dry Creek?" Thomas nodded. "More than just Halvers, more than Dalton. There are families who've kept secrets for decades. They'll do anything to protect those secrets, even if it means spilling blood." Reed shivered. "So, we're not done?" "No," Elias said quietly. "Not by far." The whispers grew louder, pressing against the thin wooden walls. Elias pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices penetrated anyway. "Remember, remember, justice, blood, free." Elias swallowed. "They're calling for something." Thomas's eyes were hard. They want someone to act. And now, it's on us. The next morning, a knock at the cabin door startled them. Reed jumped, nearly toppling the chair. Thomas motioned for calm. Elias opened the door. Outside stood a woman, mid-30s, wearing a simple dress and carrying a basket of herbs and dried flowers. Her eyes were sharp, aware, and unafraid. "You're Elias Harper," she said. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "I am Lillian Turner. My grandmother spoke of the hollow and the mother pit. She told me that when the dead rise, the living must guide them. That includes you." Thomas stepped forward. "We freed them. What more guidance can they need?" Lillian's lips tightened. "Freeing them only begins the journey. The hollow will not rest until every soul is honored, every story told, every wrong acknowledged. And it is not only the hollow you need to fear. Some still walk among the living, protecting the secrets of the dead." Elias frowned. "You mean families like the Claymores?" She nodded. "And worse, greed, fear, vengeance. The human heart can be darker than the hollow itself," Reed whispered. "So we're still in danger from people?" "And from what you freed," Lillian said, voice dropping. "The dead will call, and they will test you. They will see if you are worthy of carrying their memory forward. If you fail," her gaze hardened, "then you too will join them." Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. The hollow had been terrifying, but now he realized something worse might be waiting, something human. That evening, Lillian led them to a hidden grove just beyond the outskirts of Dry Creek. Fireflies floated in the air, and the trees leaned in like spectators at some ancient ritual. At the center stood a circle of people, old, young, black, white, their faces shadowed in the firelight. "This is the Council of Shadows," Lillian whispered. "They remember what the town tries to forget. They watch over the mother pit. They will help or judge, depending on your choices." Elias stepped forward, heart pounding. "We've freed the dead. We've seen the hollow. We have justice for those buried in the Claymore fields. What else is left?" An elderly woman, hair white as bone, stepped forward. "Justice is never complete. The dead remember every slight, every unpunished crime. And now, the hollow has awakened more than it ever has before. It will ripple through the land. Those who have sinned, hidden their deeds, will feel its pull. They will be tempted to strike, and the living must choose. Protect the innocent, or let vengeance consume all." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "So we are to guard the living and the dead?" The woman nodded. "Yes, and to bear the burden of remembrance. Every story, every life, Every injustice you witness from here on, it is your responsibility. Do not falter." Elias clenched his jaw. He had freed the dead, but now, he realized, the true struggle was only beginning. The firelight flickered across the grove, shadows, twisting into faces he did not recognize, some human, some something else. And in the distance, through the pines, he thought he heard it. A whisper, long and slow, a voice older than memory, calling his name. "Elias Harper, remember, keep them alive." The morning fog had not lifted when Elias Harper, Thomas, Reed, and the Council of Shadows returned to Dry Creek. The streets were eerily silent, as though the town itself were holding its breath. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and yet the signs of activity were everywhere. Footprints, overturned crates, the faint echo of hurried footsteps. Elias felt the hollow's memory pulsing through the earth, resonating with the fear, guilt, and secrets buried in every corner of the town. Freed from the mother pit, the dead were no longer bound, and the living were beginning to feel the pull of those memories. "They know," Thomas said quietly, his cane tapping on the muddy road. "They all know now. Some will try to resist. Others will exploit the hollow's fear to protect themselves." Reed shivered. "This town's got ghosts in every house, it seems. Human and not human." Lillian Turner, walking alongside them, glanced around sharply. "The hollow isn't attacking yet. It's waiting to see what the living will do with the freedom of the dead and the sins it will uncover." By mid-morning, the first confrontation arrived. At the town square, Elias saw a group gathered, led by a man in a dark coat. His eyes were hard, his hands clenched around a cane tipped with iron. "You," the man shouted, pointing at Thomas. "You brought that curse upon this town." Thomas stepped forward calmly. "The hollow is not a curse. It is justice. The dead have been freed, and the living are accountable." The man spat, red in the mist. "I don't care about justice. I care about keeping Dry Creek safe from this horror." The crowd murmured, restless, divided. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy, fearful of the anger they had long buried. Elias gritted his teeth. "You cannot control the hollow. You cannot hide from what you've done. It is here, and it remembers every injustice." The man laughed, sharp and cruel. "Then let it remember me. Let it strike. But I won't be bullied by a child and his council." Before anyone could respond, the earth beneath the man's feet shifted. Cornstalks bent and broken erupted through the town square like twisted fingers. Shadows moved unnaturally along the edges of buildings. A low hum vibrated through the air, resonating in the bones of everyone present. The hollow had begun to act not through violence, but by showing its power, its reach. The town froze. From the mist, shadows emerged, pale figures, the size and shape of children, their faces smooth, unformed, yet with the same hollow awareness Elias had seen at the mother pit. They moved quickly, but with deliberation, passing through the crowd, brushing against the living, leaving cold impressions that made the skin crawl. "They are children?" Reed whispered, voice trembling. "No," Lillian said quietly. "They are memories, embodiments of those who suffered and were forgotten. They test the living." One shadow approached the man who had challenged Thomas. He froze, eyes wide, hands shaking. The shadow raised its hand and touched his chest. The man screamed, not in pain, but in memory. Scenes flashed before him, fields of claymore, chains, whipping posts, faces of people he had ignored, enslaved, or cheated. He fell to his knees, sobbing, unable to speak. Elias realized the hollow's new method. It would reveal the truths buried deep, forcing the living to reckon with the consequences of their deeds or their silence. The crowd recoiled. Some fainted. Others fled. A few began shouting in panic, blaming neighbors, families, anyone, for the horrors that now seemed tangible. Thomas gestured for Elias and Reed to follow him, the hollows testing them. The town will fracture under its influence. We must gather those willing to see the truth.
And we must protect the innocent.
Lillian guided them to the inn, where several townsfolk who had been quietly observing the events gathered.
They are frightened, she said.
But some understand. Those are the ones who will help you. The rest may need guidance or restraint. Elias scanned the group. A blacksmith who had lost his son to an illness and hidden the truth of how his negligence contributed to it. A widow who had buried her husband's crimes behind piety, and several others, all aware, all watching. They will be our allies, Thomas said. We cannot fight the Hollow, but we can channel its lessons, direct its truth, and prevent it from consuming those who do not deserve it. Reed frowned. You mean control it? Not control, Lillian said firmly. Guide, influence, teach. By evening, the Hollow's influence spread further. In the market district, a man was discovered attempting to burn down a neighbor's barn. The barn had contained the bones of laborers long forgotten, buried by his ancestors to cover years of abuse. Elias, Thomas, and the council arrived just as the flames began to catch. The Hollow's shadows twisted around the man, forcing him to his knees. Faces appeared within the smoke, screaming silently. The man convulsed, shouting confessions of theft, cruelty, and murder. The townsfolk watched in horrified fascination. Some cried, some prayed. Some began to question their own silence. Elias stepped forward. Do you see? This is not revenge. This is memory. Justice is not quick nor kind, but it is inevitable. The Hollow does not lie. It remembers everything. You cannot escape it, Thomas added. And those who act with mercy and courage, they survive. Those who cling to lies and blood, they will be tested until the earth itself remembers their sin. The night deepened, and Dry Creek was restless. Shadows moved along the rooftops. The wind carried whispers, unintelligible but urgent. Elias could feel the Hollow watching, not attacking, but stretching its influence. Reed whispered, I can't sleep with that out there. How are we supposed to live like this? You survive, Elias said, voice firm, and you guide others. You keep the memory alive. That is what the Hollow demands of us now. Lillian approached him. Elias, you understand now. The dead are free. The Hollow has awakened, but it will not strike indiscriminately. It tests the living, forces truth into their hearts, but it is patient, and it is merciless. Elias swallowed, looking out over the town. The events of the day had fractured Dry Creek's complacency. Some would rise to truth. Others would fall to fear. Thomas's cane tapped sharply. Tomorrow, we go to the Claymore estate. Halver's descendants are restless. The Hollow will guide us there, but we must prepare for resistance, not just from the living, but from those who would hide the past. And the Hollow, he trailed off, voice low. It will not wait for mercy. Elias lay awake that night, listening to the whispers drifting from the forest. They were louder than before, layered with memory, anguish, and something else, anticipation. Remember, face the truth, honor, fail, join us. He felt the pull in his chest, the weight of responsibility, the fear that every misstep would bring judgment. The dead were free. The Hollow was awake. But now, the living had to choose, honor the dead, confess the past, and act with courage, or be consumed by the same reckoning they had unleashed. As the wind rattled the cabin windows, Elias realized the truth. The Hollow's awakening was only the beginning. Dry Creek, the Claymores, Halvers, and even the Council of Shadows were all now part of a story that could not be rewritten, and he, Elias Harper, had to lead it. The storm over Whisper Creek broke open like a scream torn from the sky. Lightning carved the heavens, laying white scars over the darkness as Elias staggered through the ruins of the church, the same place where Reverend Harrow's sermons had once drowned out the whispers that the land itself was cursed. But now the whispers were no longer hiding, they were roaring. The bones beneath the church, black, native, nameless, were rising through the floorboards like pale fingers clawing for justice. Their voices tangled with the wind. We remember. We rise. Elias clutched the iron bell tower key to his chest. The only way to seal the breach, the only way to end Harrow's damnation, was to ring the bell he had corrupted. One perfect chime, one final note sharper than a scream. Behind him, Harrow's shadow elongated on the broken wall, too long, too thin, twisting like a serpent tasting blood. "Put the key down, son," Harrow hissed. His voice was not a voice anymore. It was 100 stolen voices fused into a single growl. "All this suffering, all this land owes, it belongs to me." Elias didn't turn. He couldn't. He climbed the tower ladder as the wood buckled under the dead weight rising from below. Hands, ghostly, skeletal, blood-stained, reached for his ankles, begging him to keep going, or begging him to fall. Halfway up, Harrow's hand, long, clawed, and wrong, snatched Elias's ankle. Elias felt the heat of hell spread through his bone. With a scream, he kicked free and hurled himself upward, bursting into the bell chamber, just as Harrow's warped head rose through the floor like a nightmare crawling through a crack. The bell hung above them, huge, ancient, pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't metal. Elias lifted the iron striker, and Harrow lunged. The tower shook, the world shook, the night itself buckled. Harrow's claws pierced Elias's shoulder, dragging him down. Blood spilled. The ghosts shrieked. The wind died. Elias used his last breath, last strength, last heartbeat, and slammed the striker into the bell. Chime. The sound was not a sound. It was a blade, a burning light. 1,000 buried names screaming their freedom. The bell shattered. The ghosts surged, and Harrow's body dissolved like dust pulled into a storm, shredding apart with a howl that shook the trees for miles. Elias collapsed. The spirits lifted him softly, carefully, like they had been waiting a century for someone to carry. As dawn broke across Whisper Creek, the fields fell silent. The church sank into the earth, and the last shadow of Harrow burned away with the rising sun. In the new quiet, the wind whispered only one thing: "It is done." But far beyond the town, deep in the forests where the first bodies were taken long before Harrow wore his first mask of holiness, something else heard that final chime. Something older, something patient, something that had been waiting for Harrow to fall so it could rise. And the forest answered with a slow, deliberate echo. Chime.